This time we will meet the German tribes, seemingly humble peoples but with a huge influence on history. We also want to know more about the mysterious cult of the Vestal Virgins in Rome. But first, we're going to Teotihuacan, one of the greatest cities of the 2nd century. Southeast of Mexico City lies the volcano Popocatépetl, better known locally as El Popo. It erupted as recently as December 2000, forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of residents from the area. But this eruption was nothing compared to the colossal disaster that happened in the 1st century. This event was of a type that occurs globally once every century, perhaps 10 times more violent than the famous eruption of Pompeii in 79 AD. The catastrophe seems to have acted as a catalyst for the rise of Teotihuacan. This ancient city with its magnificent pyramids lies about 50 miles north of El Popo. Construction of the pyramids was largely completed in the 2nd century. Subsequently, the city grew into one of the largest in the world, with a population of 125,000 or more. Just as Teotihuacan rose seemingly out of nowhere, it began to decline from around 650 AD. Many centuries later, likely in the 1300s, the Mexica came across the ruins of the long-abandoned city. Better known as the Aztecs, they gave the city its name, which means something like home of the gods in the Nahuatl language. The Aztecs arrived in the region only centuries later, but the Maya had been a great civilization for a long time, as we saw in a previous episode. According to Maya writings, they called the city Pu, which means something like the reeds. The Otomi were the original peoples of the region, but the hieroglyphs used in Teotihuacan have not yet been deciphered. The people of Teotihuacan likely viewed their pyramids, at least in part, as a projection of the volcanoes in their area. For instance, there is the Great Pyramid of Cholula just about 20 miles from El Popo. Its Aztec name is Tlaquihualtepetl, meaning constructed mountain, while Popocatépetl translates to smoking mountain. Construction of the first section began as early as 300 BC, and work continued for many hundreds of years afterward. It is now the world's largest monument ever built. Sacred mountains are part of mythologies from around the world, even in ancient Egypt, a land devoid of volcanoes or notable mountains. In one of his stories, supreme god Atum, the ancestor to all other gods, creates himself by rising from the primordial waters on the mountain Benben. The Benben stone is the top stone of the pyramid, and the hieroglyph for the word Benben includes a pyramid. While the older Egyptian pyramids may have served to guide the death to their next destination, those of Teotihuacan look more like temples. The Pyramid of the Sun is the 3rd largest in the world, and is situated along a central avenue. This avenue of the dead runs from the Pyramid of the Moon in the north, to the Temple of Quetzalcoatl in the south, at an angle of about 16 degrees. Which points it to a mountain known as Cerro Gordo. Whether the architects of Teotihuacan were also inspired by the constellation of Orion is unknown. They certainly designed their street plan very carefully, with their sacred calendars in mind. One of the various cycles used for the sacred Maya calendar is a period of 260 days. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl is decorated with 260 heads of the feathered serpent, each with a hole to possibly hold a marker for the day. Quetzalcoatl is perhaps the most important deity throughout Mesoamerica. It is the ruler of the sky and wind, associated with Venus. But it was also the bringer of knowledge and wisdom. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent is the smallest of the three pyramids and was built a little bit later, around 150 AD. It is part of the Ciudadela, a large plaza with a number of temples, surrounded by a wall. It may have served as a gathering place to attend ceremonies, with enough space for the entire population of the city. Apparently, its location was very carefully selected, as the course of the Rio San Juan had to be altered a little bit. Several hundred people were buried at the site, perhaps as part of the ceremony to inaugurate the temple. A tunnel under the pyramid leads to even more spaces underground. The closer to the pyramid, the higher the social status of the departed seems to be. Teotihuacan has been a major proponent of Quetzalcoatl, but the oldest known depiction dates back to 900 BC and was found at the Olmec site in La Venta. This Quetzalcoatl is remarkably similar to the depictions of dragons that have existed in China for thousands of years. The prosperity of the city attracted a diversity of peoples, speaking all kinds of languages. Many were housed in large apartment buildings, in different neighborhoods, that reflected the various backgrounds and social status of their inhabitants. A powerful upper class, perhaps of priests and shamans, lived in large and luxury houses near the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, inside the walls of the plaza. Craftsmen and fine artists must have been in high demand to create the city's brilliant works of art in vibrant colors and artistic murals of supernatural beauty. Perhaps not surprising, as the region is known for its peculiar mushrooms. Rumbling noises, earthquakes and eruptions of fire, rocks and lava are the hallmarks of active volcanoes. But these terrifying events also contribute to a high level of soil fertility, enabling farmers to produce surpluses. This allowed labor to be freed from food production and redirected towards creating art and building monuments. The nearby presence of obsidian, a type of volcanic glass, must have been hugely important to Teotihuacan's economy as well. Obsidian was used for beautiful artifacts, as well as a currency. Trade in all kinds of products flourished. Teotihuacan extended its influence far beyond its own territory, be it through soft power or military might. Nevertheless, if we broadly distinguish two survival strategies, competition and cooperation, Teotihuacan in the 2nd century appears to have been less about conflict and more about trade. We head to the northern regions of Europe, where the various Germanic tribes seem to rely more on a strategy of competition and warfare. No cities here, let alone pyramids. That said, the Germanic peoples have had a profound influence on the course of history, from the overthrow in 476 of the last emperor in Rome, to the wearing of trousers in modern times. The Germanic people preferred to live in spacious farmhouses, deeply connected to their vast forests. They engaged in caring for their horses, and growing grain for their bread and, naturally, their beer. A simple life, occasionally disrupted by foreign innovations like paying for goods with silver. That, at least, is the picture Roman historian Tacitus painted of the Germanic tribes in 98 AD. Society was organized on the basis of kinship and family, rather than hierarchy. The chiefs fight for victory, the companions for their chief, as Tacitus puts it.
They assemble, unless upon some sudden emergency, on stated days, either at the new or full moon, which they account the most auspicious season for beginning any enterprise. An inconvenience produced by their liberty is, that they do not all assemble at a stated time, as if it were in obedience to a command, but 2 or 3 days are lost in the delays of convening. When they all think fit, they sit down armed. Silence is proclaimed by the priests, who have on this occasion a coercive power. Then the king, or chief, and such others as are conspicuous for age, birth, military renown, or eloquence, are heard, and gain attention rather from their ability to persuade, than their authority to command. The wife does not bring a dowry to her husband, but receives one from him. That the woman may not think herself excused from exertions of fortitude, or exempt from the casualties of war, she is admonished by the very ceremonial of her marriage, that she comes to her husband as a partner in toils and dangers, to suffer and to dare equally with him, in peace and in war. Their slaves have not, like ours, particular employments in the family allotted them. Each is the master of a habitation and household of his own. The Lord requires from him a certain quantity of grain, cattle, or cloth, as from a tenant, and so far only the subjection of the slave extends. His domestic offices are performed by his own wife and children.
According to Tacitus, the Germans looked to the flight of birds as an omen of future events, just as the Romans and other nations did. But they also interpreted the sounds of special horses, harnessed to a sacred chariot. And even twigs of fruit trees with certain marks, perhaps letters from the runic alphabet. But no written sources from the 2nd century are available. The Germanic languages originated in a region overlapping northern Germany and southern Sweden. This is just one of many branches of the vast Indo-European language tree. The roots of this tree are believed to be with the Yamnaya people, roughly in present-day Ukraine. Around 3500 BC, Proto-Indo-European languages began to spread across an ever-widening area. This was made possible by technological advances developed in this area, such as chariots drawn by oxen or horses. This explains the similarities in mythology between such distant peoples as the Hindus in India, and the Greeks, Romans, and Germans in Europe. The Romans identified Thor with Jupiter, who both resemble Hindu god Indra. Thor is the son of Odin, who the Romans compared to Mercury. Tyr is seen as Mars, the god of war, and Freya as Venus. Their connection to the forests can still be heard in old fairy tales. Human sacrifice was widespread across the world, and there is some evidence for this practice among Germanic tribes as well. But it was especially through their many conflicts with the Roman Empire that they made large sacrifices. In 113 BC, the Cimbrian War broke out, when hundreds of thousands of people from northern tribes became displaced and drifted southward. Facing a common enemy in the Romans, they may have occasionally allied with Celtic warriors. In any case, several devastating defeats were inflicted on the Roman armies. It was only after Gaius Marius, a general from humble descent, was put in charge, that the Romans were able to drive the Germanic invaders out in 101 BC. Since then, Rome's influence grew even stronger, and under Augustus, the deified emperor, some Germanic territories were annexed. But in 9 AD, the Romans suffered a massive defeat in the Teutoburg forest, losing several divisions, including their standards. It was now clear that in warfare, far from being backward barbarians, the Germans were very much a cause for alarm. In 117 AD, Hadrian became the new emperor of the Roman Empire, succeeding the successful Emperor Trajan. After nearly 1,000 years of expansion, Hadrian favored consolidation over further military conquests. But we will hear more about him in the next episode. For now, we turn our attention to another important aspect of Roman society, which is the cult of the Vestal Virgins. A college of 6 priestesses, known as the Vestals, was charged with the important task of keeping an eternal flame burning in the Temple of Vesta, for the good of the Roman people. This tradition was likely initiated as early as the 7th century BC by King Numa Pompilius. The Vestals were selected as young girls and took a vow to keep their virginity for 30 years. After that, they were allowed to marry. They received an excellent education, and their palace was equipped with all modern comforts. The Vestals were supervised by the Vestalis Maxima, but the emperor in his role as the Pontifex Maximus had the final say. For while the Vestal Virgins were held in high esteem, they could also find themselves involved in Rome's political affairs. We conclude with a quote from Suetonius, the author of the 12 Caesars. Suetonius had to live under Emperor Domitian, a demagogue known for his narrow-mindedness. Apparently, the punishments for loss of virginity that Domitian demanded were especially harsh.
The lewdness of the Vestal Virgins, which had been overlooked by his father and brother, he punished severely, but in different ways. Offences committed before his reign, with death, and those since its commencement, according to ancient custom. For to the two sisters called Oceloti, he gave liberty to choose the mode of death which they preferred, and banished their paramours. But Cornelia, the president of the Vestals, who had formerly been acquitted upon a charge of incontinence, being a long time after again prosecuted and condemned, he ordered to be buried alive, and her gallants to be whipped to death with rods in the comitium, excepting only a man of praetorian rank, to whom, because he confessed the fact, while the case was dubious, and it was not established against him, though the witnesses had been put to the torture, he granted the favor of banishment. See you in the next decade.